Hey, readers and drinkers. Welcome to Literally Drinking, the podcast for aspiring authors and book lovers, where my co-host, Ross Mikkelsen, and I talk with authors about their book and enjoy their favorite drink while we do it. Or really, any drink. In today's episode, we're speaking with Glen Mikkelsen, the author of Kelly Sutherland, King of the Chucks, about this legend of chuckwagon racing, and how to go from square one and get a book across the finish line to publication. We also asked Glen what his favorite book is, and I guarantee that answer will surprise you. I'm Paul Boucher. Over to Ross to start things off.
Let's have a drink.
All right, cheers. Thanks for having me.
Literally Drinking.
So, Glen, Kelly Sutherland, subject to your book, speaking of drinks, quite a beer drinker, as it turns out.
He was in his day.
I thought one of the most interesting pieces of the book was about his quitting and how he, in a way, just stopped at one point, just whatever it was, he hit the wall and just said, look, I'm going to stop, and then did stop. What was that like, talking to him about that?
He's very, obviously, if you look into the book, he's very candid, a very honest man about all his stories. He does not seem to be scared of his ghosts or the demons in his past. So he's very candid, very honest about the story that he's lived. And, he, as you mentioned, that once he did quit, it was a hard stop. And then he got involved with Alcoholics Anonymous and continued on sharing his story amongst his peers who were having similar problems and similar issues. But in telling the story, it was certainly, he was very candid, very, I felt certainly very honored to be within his house listening to the story that was so transformational for him. He obviously battled something that he just could not get away from. The attraction of alcohol was just so strong for, basically he said he started drinking when he was a teenager and carried on until 1995. And so that, period of time was, almost 4 decades of drinking, 3 decades, I guess. He was just, it was just a normal part of who he was, the culture of the sport. I think certainly some of the aspects of that drinking culture has dissipated over time here. So it's not quite as the same importance that alcohol played back in the day within chuckwagon racing. It's not, it's certainly more frowned upon now for a variety of reasons. But he was certainly, it was certainly a real honor, honestly, to listen to his story of how he turned a corner and carried on with the next few decades of racing.
The other drinking tangent that I thought was interesting was that nightclub, which I had never heard of, that they owned. That sounded like a ton of fun. You had never gone there, I assume, right? It was closed.
No, I'd heard about it. When he was owning it, certainly heard about Kelly's Bar, but no, I never made it. But I did go up. So when I was up there in Grand Prairie visiting him, did make a trip to the building that was the bar. And, it's about 10 minutes, 15 minutes just north of Grand Prairie. It's very close. And you think about, he talks about having a chuck wagon hanging from the ceiling. Well, the ceiling's not very high. So, it's not a very big building. So, if they were packing hundreds and hundreds of people in this building, it certainly would have been over capacity, I'm sure, compared to, fire regulations of today. But just the antics that would have gone on in that place would have just been, they would have been very Western.
Yeah. It just, in the book, you just made it sound like, I thought, that just sounds like a load of fun. That would have been a fun place to be on a Saturday night in Grand Prairie.
Well, as his wife Debbie said, that every person living in Grand Prairie, they celebrated their 18th birthday in that time at Kelly's
I
bar.
bet they did. So this book is writing a book about Kelly Sutherland. Is this the kind of a white whale for you? Like, have you wanted to do this for a long time, or is this a natural extension of other books you've done?
Like Moby Dick?
Like Moby Dick.
I think it probably is partly my Moby Dick. You know, I had a chance to many years ago. So in the late 1990s, living here in Prince George, BC, was very keen on chuckwagon racing. And so thought, well, I'd like to go see what people do to do their training. So I knew of, obviously previously had a little bit of contact with Kelly's son, Mark. So reached out to him. This was around 1997 and said, yeah, I'm interested in seeing what you guys do for spring training. And he obviously wanted to talk to his dad and said, well, why don't you come up and check it out? So on the May long weekend, we went up, and my wife and I, Joanne, we took our tent and stayed in a campsite and went out to the... actually, I think first we went out to their house where they had the horses, and they gave us a little tour. And then the next day, we went... I think we went out to their place briefly, but then we went out to the Evergreen Park, which is where they have the Grand Prairie Stampede, and they were practicing. They were hooking up their horses. I don't know if it was the first time, but it was early in the, just before the season started in a week or two. And so they did the figure eight and around, had their horses going at full gallop for about 3/4 of the track. And at that time, both Joanne and I had a chance of standing the wagon with Kelly and Mark. Then Joanne went with Mark. And they're just so gracious, right? They really didn't know us, but they allowed us to have these super interesting experiences. What I do remember about that is that I got into the back of the wagon with Kelly. And I think there was me and another guy standing in the back. So they don't have the canvas on the back of the wagon. They just have the bare hoops, which the canvas sits around, kind of the curved bars. And so we're hanging on to these. And as we're kind of getting onto the track and the horses are trotting up and getting ready to do the figure eight, he turns and he says to us, I don't want no fucking tipped wagon. Okay. Message delivered. I'm going to lean into the curve, into the turn to make sure the wagon doesn't tip over. And away we went. Anyways, and so later that, I don't remember this exact timing of it, but they had us over for dinner, and then when Kelly was found out that we were sleeping in a tent in a campground, he said, why don't you stay at our place? So they let us crash at their place for the next night. So had a chance to talk to them then, and get a tour of the trophies and different things he had at that time. And so he was super gracious. And Kelly had kind of a reputation of, being a troublemaker. And, as you read in the book, that there was, both the public and his competitors had some opinions about him. And certainly, he's appear as a very brash guy. Like, he's all business on the racetrack. And yet he couldn't have been more hospitable, more kind, and more welcoming to us, just, really complete strangers. So ever since then, had a real appreciation for the man's talents and characters. And, when we saw him, it would have been just, as you mentioned earlier, a couple of years since he'd stopped drinking. So it was kind of a turning point in his life, and maybe our timing was just lucky, positive, good. That was maybe just the timing that we reached out was the right time to do that. But, he just could not have been just more informative and gracious and giving us an experience that was just, a dream come true. So then a few years later after that, I worked on this book my first one called Never a Holler Woe. And he was one of the cowboys featured in that book, along with Buddy Bensmiller, Jim Nevada, and then also a small part on Kelly's son Mark and Troy Dorchester. So, since then that was probably in year 2000 that book came out. So for a couple decades, at least had kind of an idea percolating that, when the time was right, it would be great to do a biography specifically on Kelly, just because I think he has just been such, as I say kind of in the introduction, that I think he's not only the toughest chuckwagon competitor ever, but arguably the toughest competitor in Canadian sports history over 50 years, competing at such a high level in such a unique and specific sport. That just an amazing career. And so I think the opportunity to have that, to tell the story and to share some of the things he did, it was a Moby Dick. So here we are.
Nice.
Well, and there were I love the way that the book didn't actually become a list of any kind. I love the way that you actually told the story. So I'm curious, so you had a lot of time to think about it, as you'd done the other book too, but how did you kind of find the nugget of the story? Like, how did it become, this is the story I want to tell, without it becoming a list?
Well, the one thing that Kelly is tremendous doing is he is a tremendous storyteller. So, you think about kind of the stereotypical cowboy, whether that's a rodeo cowboy or wagon cowboy or a cowboy, working cowboy, or you think, well, could be a person of few words, really not too colorful, just really matter of fact, get to the point. Well, Kelly is all that, but he is also a tremendous storyteller. So he can regale you with tales that comparatively, not everybody can tell stories like that, right? Few people can be so delightful and colorful within their storytelling, for whoever you are, whatever profession you're in. So Kelly has that talent, and of course he's talking about something that is so unique that so very few people on the planet do, that there's just an opportunity just to share those stories rather than just making it a list of, well, he did this, well, he did that, right? And those, I'm certainly familiar with those kind of history kind of books where it's just more facts than actually the color behind it. And to Kelly and his family's credit, they are able to offer that color, so it was easy to do just because of Kelly's talents and being able to share a story.
It was interesting to me how he could recall details of a race, and I was thinking about, you hear great athletes talking about, like some golfer, he knows exactly how he approached the eighth hole, 30 years ago, or a hockey player. We lost 3-2 to that one, and I remember that specific play, where I think the rest of us human beings don't kind of remember things like that. But he clearly, from your book, remembered individual races, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, you tell me. Like he seemed to have a catalog in his head of races.
Yeah, and you would know the races, he would know, certainly the bigger races, of course, have more impact, but he would recall the competitors, he would recall the horses that he has hooked, he would recall the horses that he would have used for his outriders, and the outriders that they had riding with them. So yeah, you're right, just the memory of detail over, calculating with them. He said over 1,000 races. When you start calculating, it's like, he's over 2,000 races over 50 years. That's a lot of details to remember. So his ability to keep a recollection of that is very impressive.
You did mention at some point, actually, I love the way you made the point several different ways and different times in the book, where you talked about how great he was within this sport that's such a niche and so demanding. But he does talk about how, especially later in his career, and especially after he'd stopped drinking, it was like Gretzky on the ice. Like everything would just slow down. Once he was in the race, even though it's still happening at breakneck speed, he was able to just kind of chill and see it almost, not slow-mo, but see it as it was happening and make sense of it in ways that nobody else, it seemed, in the sport could.
Yeah, I'd have to, talk to a few other people, but there might be a few others that could do it. But yeah, you're right. Just his ability, his confidence level, right? He would just be able to, strategize the scenario that he's going into prior to having that race. Like he would, analyze all the different potentials that could happen who he was competing with, what their horses were like, how they drive, and then, at that time they'd have the 4 barrel positions in Calgary and most of the races, and he would just be able to, go through all the different potentials of how things might shake out. Because, he talks about that really most races are won in the first 10, 15 seconds of the race, because whoever comes out of the barrels first usually has your best chance of winning if they're to the rail. And his insightfulness on how, depending on how this guy does that, or he has that troubles with his horses, right? He just does that in preparation mentally, and he could go into those races just very confident, just having a plan of what he's going to do based on how those first 10 or 15 seconds shake out. But he has just so much going on that he, with his horses and his team, that to be able to forecast that and be ready for it was a tremendous skill.
Yeah, craziness. There's a picture very early in the book, you and the sibling in my middle window, on your horses. So, Ross alluded to this being something that you'd been pursuing for a long time, but was this a lifelong interest of yours, the chuck wagons in particular? Or is it something that kind of came back to you when you were living in Prince George?
I really don't know why they're so fascinating. Maybe it's because my brother always beat me running around the house on his stick horse, because I was always trying to catch up to him. So it's been this latent sense of loss that I've always been dealing with.
There's counseling for that. You could deal with that.
The counseling came when I finally could actually see real race horses and experience that. And it's finally, well, there's more to it than just, watching my brother's hat fly off in front of me with his 6-gun pointing at me as he's turned around with
nice.
Pistol caps, pop, pop, pop. But I do recall, and I looked at the kind of the way the old Stampede track was looking. I don't know how this really happened, but I have this memory that being there with my family, just as a little squirt, and we were walking around the Stampede barns, and I have this memory of, we're down by the horses and stuff, and kind of came outdoors, and the wagons came circling around during a race, and kind of looked up and heard this commotion of horses and cowboys yelling, and the wagons going past, and just rolled past in this tornado of Western energy, and kind of being spellbound by it. But looking, because I thought, where did that happen? And I don't know where exactly it happened, but it seems this is a memory that I have. So for whatever reason, that kind of sticks with me. And then I do recall watching the races at my grandmother's house on her black and white television. I don't know if Ross, if you remember this, but we would be dropped off probably, and she was looking after us, and she would have the races on her set. So I remember watching those with her, and then just somehow became transfixed by actually seeing them in person, and went, hey, that is really something. And as I mentioned in the book, it's terrific watching chuck wagon racing and rodeo too on television, but even more so than rodeo. The best way to experience wagon racing is to be standing next to the racetrack, and they don't loiter as they're coming past. They're full tilt, but that commotion of mass energy that is not propelled by gasoline, it's not automotive, it's just equine power, and the men and the wagons, and as they go rolling, and often they're called that they're thundering past. There's nothing like it. I say there's nothing like it on the planet. And yeah, it just hooked me as a kid, and I've been fascinated by it ever since.
You get that question a lot?
I get it all the time. Like, why?
And
people are perplexed.
And do people in wagon racing ask you the question? Like,
No.
they like, why are you? No, they
get it.
They don't ask. Yeah.
That's a good question. Nope, they don't ask because they understand. So there's a commonality within our interests that is shared within that community of people. But yeah, it's people that have never seen it, never, seen it maybe only on television or YouTube or something, and passing, maybe, sports highlights, whatever, right? They've never actually gone to see a race. But those who have, yeah, they understand it.
No, it's a pretty visceral experience. As a transplanted Easterner, to me, that was Stampede. I remember because the first time that I ever saw it, we were trackside. And it's the finish, right? Like where you're standing. And I just had never seen anything or felt anything like that. And the combination of the sound and the vibration and the energy, like you said, it's the only thing I really go to Stampede for now, really. Mm-hmm. It is the highlight of that experience, and I try to take as many people as I can to see it. The people who are in it, though, that was a great question, Ross, because I wanted to ask Glenn, how did you get into the world a little bit? Because you would have had to gain some trust from what I imagine is a pretty protective community sometimes. Some people would be more guarded than others, and you got some great pieces from almost every one of the major names that I've heard since I've been in Calgary in the 80s.
That's a good point. Yeah, they have been guarded, right? Because they do get accused of doing something that not everybody agrees with. I guess just just was honest, maybe, and sincere. And then, and kind of the things that I did put together as far as magazine articles and then books, they were truthful. They weren't critical. And so maybe just over that, it took probably time, and then just the ability to create those relationships, because there is a sense of commonality, of appreciation, of understanding. That's probably why they've as a group that we're privileged to be part of it. I would say though that even though I've had these amazing experiences and be able to contribute in my own way without actually participating to some extent, I still feel like an outsider because I'm not not going down the road with them throughout the summer. I'm just unable to do that. So I just, because I'm not there all the time, don't live in Alberta, don't have that constant connection with them, that there is sense that, I still, I'm not completely part of that community, which is fine, because in a sense, I think if I was as so connected with everything, that it has allowed me to be a little more objective, and I don't feel that I'm, it's certainly such a small community that there are, politics, there's factions, there's, as with any group of people, that there's just the dynamics that happen within a community that sometimes are negative or positive, and, there's disagreements, and because I'm not as closely part of that, then I'm allowed to have some neutrality and objectivity that maybe allows these books to come out with a different type of tone that would happen if I was completely involved with it. So I think that's partly been to my benefit in creating these books, because I'm not as closely tied to things.
Specifically, was it hard to get Kelly to agree to it?
We've been talking about it for several years, actually. And then, the timing was just right. Part of it, honestly, is finding a publisher that would be willing to do it. So, the Canadian book publishing, especially for nonfiction these days, is very challenging. It's not an easy time to be it's never been, I don't think, an easy time in the last 30 years to be a book publisher, but even more so lately. So thankfully I have the same publisher, Folklore Publishing, that supported the last book. They were keen. She was keen. Faye Boer, who's the publisher, the owner of the company, was keen on the story too. So that was a critical part in making this project a reality. So thanks to her for sure.
Anybody that didn't talk to you? that you wanted to talk to?
Nope. No. The thing with doing a biography. So, a biography like this, a couple of things are interesting, right? It's a little different doing a biography of a living person because I think as you're creating the book, you want to. It depends on your relationship, right? As whatever the relationship the author has with the subject. You could, if it's a tell-all book, you could bring up all these ghosts and secrets and issues that the character that you're writing about may have had that, could be very, possibly have negative consequences for them and their family, which, certainly some of the books that have come out are like that. But when you're writing a book like this one, that's not the tone of the book you want to have. You want to be able to share and support a really unique and colorful story that is unlike, I think any other story that there is. So you have to be respectful of, the family and how they could be perceived, right? You want, certainly in this situation, you want the family to be supportive of it. You don't want them to say, oh no, we don't want to touch that book, right? Like the book buying populace of who might buy a chuckwagon book is not like the book buying populace of a Michael Jackson book. So I have to be cognizant that the audience for this book may not be it's not that huge. So you want to be writing something that that is supportive and appreciative, and that they will go and encourage others to pick up and read as well.
And we do want to talk to you about your time spent with the Jackson family doing interviews with them, by the
way. Yeah, that's my next biography.
Excellent.
I
expect it'll be a little different than the biopic.
Yeah, it'll be a little different, yeah.
You know what? The only time I found him at all circumspect, and I think it was more respectful than anything else, to me, it echoed kind of the 10 Steps program that he became involved with, not necessarily himself personally to quit, but the whole Alcoholics Anonymous philosophy of not hurting anybody that you had hurt before because of your drinking any further. And so when he was talking about, wanting to apologize to people, he was very careful about names there. And even in the family section, he kind of touched on, there were some tough spots, but he was, again, super respectful of that, which seems to play into the character that you hinted at throughout the rest of the book. Like, nobody who wins that much is universally loved in any sport. It doesn't matter who they are. No, right? But to me, it just seemed like the guy had character for days and days and days.
Oh yeah,
is that your impression after spending that much time with him?
For sure. Kelly's reputation. Like, you're exactly right. You do that when you win that much, and you're the first person disliked when you're called up on stage again. So he certainly had a lot of rivals at the time, and they would, there'd be all kinds of stories about what Kelly's doing with his horses, or some of his strategies, and there would be all that talk around the barns, right? At the time, say there's 36 families doing it. Well, there's certainly, maybe 33, 34 other people and their families, competing against him and wishing they were him, and there'd be those rivals and challengers. But that's just part of the sport. That's what makes it fascinating. It's such a close-knit, small group of people that, that those dynamics are part of the game, for sure.
So, book construction-wise, I'm super curious about this. So you're doing this biography, and you have these interviews, and you obviously knew who you wanted to interview, so you collect these interviews, and then you've got to put them together, and that's where you switch from being an interview to being an author. So how do you...
Okay,
what's
hang
the
on,
author
question.
part?
I didn't really have fully answered. The one question I do need to respond is that there would be so many stories about Kelly Sutherland. You asked about who I talked to. There would be hundreds of people who would have Kelly Sutherland stories after 50 years, right? Whether there's business people, whether he was involved with local politics in northern Alberta, whether that be people in the bar industry, people within the wagon community. I mean, he touched so many people, right? He's a very dynamic, colorful, well, again, the word colorful, but a very, well-known character in Alberta. I could have talked to thousands of people and collected all those stories.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been overwhelming, right? And where do I start? How do I curate all those interviews, all those perspectives? Impossible. So that's why, it's for the size of the book that this is, like, it's not a 800-page tome of wealth of, all those perspectives. It had to focus just on, Kelly and his families and his, his closer circle of their tales to make it a manageable product.
So how did you put the interviews you did have, how do you put them together?
Ooh, that takes a lot of time. That's so how do I put them together? Well, here's what happens. So you have to get them transcribed. And so once they're all transcribed, then you have to start piecing them together. So it's like a quilt, finding what stories, because what a story that's recorded in one, we would talk maybe for 90 minutes, 2 hours ish at a time, and then people get tired of talking, so we would have a break and start again. So you'd have to get those transcripts and then start pulling out the stories that made some. For me, it's more or less a chronological story. So then you'd have to pull here and there and then find, okay, well, how does that weave together? So then that's where you quilt them all together. The other thing is that when you're using people's conversations, transcripts, that we do not really necessarily speak in a way that's necessarily always readable. So I'd have to kind of, fix that sometimes, right? Because there's a lot of pauses. We throw in extra words within our sentences just as we do our conversation. So those would just need to be pulled out because they're just fluff, and then pull that together and write that out. So it's
but there's no physical. You're not using like a physical board with all of these transcripts and any kind of. I keep thinking of the Pixar storyboards that I've seen in those. At the beginning, did you do anything like that to make sense of it all? It seems like it would be overwhelming, even not interviewing as many people as you could have.
No. So I would have the foundation of an outline of how I kind of see the book coming to, without having those conversations and interviews to start with, kind of a broad outline of what I think would be the major talking points in the story. So I had an outline to start, and then I haven't looked at it, but I've, like with my other experience with the Rangeland Derby book, that's your first start. But then once you start doing this, that all changes. You have more or less that framework, but once you start getting the stories and finding them, it does change because you find out something else. You went, I didn't realize that. But that's a really interesting part of his journey, his life. So then you have to weave that into somewhere else. But for me, I don't use a storyboard. I just would use, I would print out all the interviews on 8.5 by 11 pages, and then just start reading them and, saying, on those pages, just start itemizing, well, this goes in chapter 1, chapter 2, based on that first outline. And then as I start pulling all those tales together and then finding the commonalities or the framework for each chapter, then start piecing those comments from Kelly or whoever it is into the chapter. But it does take quite a bit of time, actually.
Paul's got a question for you about time.
Well, I guess how much time, if you were to talk to another author from the very beginning of the process, from, okay, now we should make the story about Kelly Sutherland, now that I've done the Rangeland Derby, to the end and it's published, and not kind of not the romantic idea, the actual amount of time that it took you to from idea, research, interviews, writing, and then finally publishing. How long was that journey?
Well, like I mentioned, the first idea was probably 20 plus years ago, so you kind of sit on it for a while, but you don't do much about it, but you kind of percolate on it, so you have to account for the percolation time. And then, I guess that, within my little writing journey, the Rangeland Derby had a finite timeline, because it was going to come out on the 100th anniversary of wagon racing, so that was going to be 2023, so it had to come out then. So that did, and then after you work on a project like that, my experience here, you want to celebrate, like you put all that work into the book. So once it finally does come out, you'd like to talk to people about it because you put all this effort into and working on it in a quiet little office with no one around, which is, the writer's life is that often that you're just in your own thoughts and you're lonely. So then when you do have something to share and you're whatever, you were artists in a sense, right? You want to put out your painting or this is it, it's a book for us. So then you want to share it with people and talk to people about it. So that takes time because you're focusing on that. As case in point this, right? This is part of this for Kelly's book, what we're doing here. But that takes some energy. And then probably, so say that book came out and then I talked to Kelly around about it in the 2023 Stampede. And then it would probably take it takes 2 years to put together. But I did have some foundation work from the previous books. If you're starting from scratch completely, the foundation work would not be there to the same extent, so that would take even more time. So that, what I've done previously, helped expedite this one because, for example, there's additions to the glossary, but the glossary is pretty well done. But that can take up a lot of time as writing a glossary for a book. So I probably save some time on that, but it's certainly for sure a 2 to 3 year project. And I work full time as well, so you're working weekends and holidays and missing things because you have a deadline for this project. So, and
you mentioned your publisher. You haven't. How much editing gets done? Do you have an editor on this?
Yes. So there's a the publisher. She and I worked together. She was the editor for this project. Previously, sometimes it's been a specific editor who works for the company. First one, Rangeland, I believe there was the publisher Anna. She had an editor as well, so we went back and forth. But for whatever reason, maybe there's more confidence in what I put together this time that it was just her and I going back and forth on it. So she would go through it and probably had some people in her office check it out as well, and then we would go back and forth on it. So this one, this little story with this book, my deadline was to have it done by the end of August in 2025, and I had it done mid-June, and then we went back and forth on it throughout the autumn, and because, for example, the Rangeland Derby was printed over in China, they have to work around the deadline of the Chinese New Year. So that just takes up about a month of holidays that people aren't able to work on projects over there. So the deadline was to get it done and over to China, designed before that happens. So those are kind of the deadlines.
Your publisher have any other authors that hand things in before the deadline? Like, do you get a plaque on your wall for that or something?
I don't know.
But you do. There's a plaque.
I haven't seen a plaque yet, but
it's coming.
If I get one, I'm going to put it up.
What are your feelings about that editing process? Like, is that do you like it? Is it productive for you, or do you dislike? Do you like having somebody say, "Oh, you don't need this," or "You should beef this up," or whatever it is?
I would say that there is no part of the process that I dislike. So from coming up with the first idea of what a book could be, then that's probably, if it was a lot easier, it'd be more fun. But of course, then you got to champion and sell your pitcher idea. So then that can take some time. If everybody took all your ideas that you had right away, that'd be way better for writers. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But you got to sell the idea. So then after that, then once you do have the agreement, then the part of doing the research is fascinating, right? You just get to go to, in my experience, right? You talk to interesting people. I like going through archives. I like going through newspapers. I like going through digging out the stories and finding things that you didn't, that you come across. I like, going out and having the interviews, but also the interesting conversations. All that's with people who are involved in the research that you're trying to put together. So that's fun. And then going through with not necessarily the research, but also then the interviews. As I mentioned before, doing the weaving and the quilting and pulling it all together. And then just, going over it multiple times. I don't know. I think that I figured it probably takes about 5 or 6 incarnations of a book before it's ready to be edited. So you just have to write it, and then so you write the book, and then let it sit for a few weeks. A week, don't go back to it right away, and then go back to it again, and read it again, and start changing things again, and moving things around. Let it sit, and that just takes, to do that multiple times, just so that you're constantly tweaking it and improving it, and then send it off. And then once you're going through the editing part again, that's the first time for me. I don't necessarily let other people read it before I send it off to on what I consider as a finished copy. Then you're going back and forth with the editor or publisher, whoever's kind of working with you on the book. And that's interesting too, right? Because they're seeing things that you haven't seen previously. They have new eyes on it, a different perspective, and you're just sometimes challenged, and then you have to argue for why you have that opinion, or you've put it that way, or why the story is going that direction. And other times they have good perspectives on things that they see that they think might be maybe not telling the story that they think that I'm trying to tell. So that's worthwhile as well. So it goes back and forth. So, and then once that's done, then you're complete, more or less, and then it's off to get printed. And then once you have the book in hand, then you get a chance to share with people, and that's pretty awesome too.
It sounds to me like being an author is a lot like being a Sutherland, like an elite athlete, in that not only do you have to have the skills, but your like holistic appreciation of every piece of the process, your respect for it, and then the discipline that it takes to do it within like all of the other things that you're doing in life. So what is your writing day when you set aside time to write? What does it look like?
Well, I probably work, I remember hearing that Pierre Burton would get up early in the morning. He would spend, 2, 3, 4 hours at it, plug things out. And I kind of took that comment a bit to heart, because I think I work better in the mornings. So your head's clear. You don't have, things coming at you throughout the day. So if I have, time that I can set aside to it, I would go at it in the morning. Spend probably from breakfast to lunch on it, and then maybe take a break. And depending what depending on the timelines that I'm dealing with, maybe carry on after lunch, or find something else to do. But I also, because of my working full time, the other thing I would do is that if I'm going through the editing, where I'm just taking up my 8.5 by 11 sheets that have the chapters on it and just reading it and tweaking it, I would go up to the university here in Prince George and find a quiet place in the library where there's, no one, maybe a few other students around, and then just have that quietude, get out of the house, get someplace different, but where you just have a different kind of, I think it's important to be out of the house, frankly, a little bit, so you just get out of what can interrupt you, and then just have that focus on going through it and scribbling and tweaking. So I would do that. So I would make those edits by hand. So just crossing things out, writing things, and then come back and do all those edits in the computer. So as I said, I would do that numerous times, like 1 to 5 times, and just, read it, edit it, because I find once you write it, then you print it on a hard piece of paper, it's easier for me to have that objectivity that I need rather than continue to stare at a computer. So then by looking at it and just flipping the pages and writing my notes on it and pulling things from here, and this paragraph should go here, and then come back and do all that work again on the computer. So it is, for those people who can do it all at once on the computer, good to them, but for me, I can't do that.
Your last book, I was really impressed with the pictures, and I think the pictures in this book are even better, like the curation of the old historical photographs, the black and whites, and then the high res color images from around the tracks. They're just dynamite. That must be a fun part of the project for you. It looks like you. To me, it comes off the page that you like doing that.
So that's an interesting story. So thanks to the Sutherland family, Kelly's wife Debbie kept these massive scrapbooks of stories about Kelly. So she kept, they're huge, like they're, maybe 1.5 feet by 2.5 feet wide. These big scrapbooks, especially for his early days, of all the newspaper clippings and photographs. So
when you saw those, did your eyes just bing?
Oh yeah, because I'm trying to find these things in archives and stuff, right? And went to the archives up in Grand Prairie, and they had a few newspaper articles, and then you can go online and find some things. But Kelly or Debbie's, the family's collection was just amazing. And then as time carries on into the 3 decades and certainly into the 2000s, they're just harder to, they just weren't printing the same kind of stories in print as they were in the 70s, right? So it just deteriorated her ability to collect those stories or clippings. Anyways, but for the 70s and 80s, it was just such a treasure of information. And then they had also collected all these photographs, right? She was very good. Debbie was very good too about finding the photographs. And so when I was up there, they just said, "Yeah, well, here you are. See what you can find." So,
and like hard copy, like snapshot type photos.
Yep.
Huh.
So they were super generous about that and said, "Yeah, just go through them, see what you want." And then I spent an entire day in their kitchen with my computer scanner, scanning all the photographs that they had available. And then I think then that evening, I was just by myself, just in their kitchen doing all the scanning, and then I went through with Kelly, and he was busy because he's trying to take his granddaughters out for barrel racing lessons or something, so he was challenged for time that night, but he was pretty good. I said, "Okay, can you help me out, just identify who's who and what year if you can?" And anyway, so did our best, and then went back and just clarified with him on some of the details once I kind of got through and see what photos were the best. But yeah, there's it's just to the family's archival credit, they do have a tremendous selection of photographs. And of course, he'd done it for so long, of course he had some great stuff. The one thing I didn't have there's a picture that was in the Grand Prairie Herald Tribune, which was just a lousy photocopy of a newspaper picture, but there's a cup when he won the Grand Prairie race of him drinking out of the bowl with Slim Pickens, the cowboy actor. And Slim Pickens, I guess, was up a couple of years as the master of the Stampede, or right, the celebrity that they brought up. Anyways, so unfortunately, it was hard to get the rights for that photograph, but I couldn't find the authentic black and white picture through the newspaper. But yeah, I was like, oh, that would have been a good one to put in too.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Mm-hmm. So you're sitting there in their kitchen, you just help yourself to whatever's in the fridge when they're not looking?
Well, actually, I did not know. You might have, but
I found something at the very beginning of the book interesting, and especially as somebody who was new to chuck wagons moving here, I didn't know that it had this American root in Texas on those cattle drives. But how did it become just this thing that's really huge in Western Canada and nowhere else?
Well, I have my theory on that, but you're right. So the chuck wagons were developed in Texas and used as basically, your mobile kitchen. So they were the food trucks of the 1800s, late 1800s. So what you see in downtown Calgary now is basically what they were, mobile kitchens. But I think they were developed in 1923 by Guy Wiedeck. The first professional races were in Calgary, and I think what it typifies, and I do mention it more so in the Rangeland Derby, is that for Canadians we have a different philosophy about our Western heritage, where the American dogma is very individualist. So that's why the culture of rodeo has prospered so much in America. It is up here too, but it's certainly where it's just a single guy riding a horse or riding a bull. They do have the team roping, but often, it's just whether the one woman on the barrel racing horse, it's just you're individual and you're in the challenges of the Western environment and the whole ideal of America, where it's the hero, it's the champion, and what he has to do to survive within his community or his environment, the hero culture. Where Canadians have a different type of experience within our Western history, our story. It's more collective, it's more cooperative. We have a different cultural approach, which, people have argued that Canadians have no history. Well, we've had this history for a long time, and it is different than America. And we are willing to work together. And the thing about chuck wagon racing is, although it is the one driver, but he is working with his team of outriders behind him. He is working with his team of horses. So it's a very collective enterprise, and he can compete only with the support of his financial sponsors, but also his family, friends, who are able to look after the horses, do the work in the barn, support the whole cowboy and the driver as he competes. So it's not just an individual, it's more of a communal effort, and which I think reflects the story of the Canadian West. And why does it succeed in Canada? I think because it tells that tale in a very unique way. The one thing that Canadians did have is that when we started off, chuck wagon racing started, Canadian tracks had the center infield where the rodeo took place, but horse racing was also a common feature of rodeos in the 1920s, within 1920s and 30s in Canada, so they could host the wagon races along with the rodeo, where American stadiums did not have that feature, so that helped nurture it as well. So the combination of both those things just propelled it into something that is very special and unique to our country.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of different opinion about the future of chuck wagon racing. In sort of the unofficial barometer of Calgary's economy at the tarp auction a few weeks ago. They set an all-time record, which bodes well for chuckwagon racing. But what's your take on where it's going to be in 10 years, maybe 20?
Well, I would have been, I think, obviously, as Kelly mentioned in his book, he's a little skeptical of its future with the lack of new drivers being developed and the financial challenges of the sport. So those are still in play, but it did, as you mentioned, that the canvas auction a few weeks ago, there was record money put into the sport, and perhaps that is a story that does bode well for the future. Maybe there is, and then, I don't know. I talked to a couple people who were at it, and they just did not see that type of money coming out that night, so it did surprise the group of people there. But it did, it's a very good sign that maybe there is the financial backing of the support, that backing for the sport that will be necessary to propel it. So I think, the challenges it does face, if something really catastrophic happened again at the Calgary Stampede, as it did in 1986, that could be very problematic for the sport, but they've taken as many steps as they can to try and mitigate that from happening. Variety of all kinds of new safety measures and rules, and taking out one of the wagons. So, as best they feel they can at this point, they've tried to diminish the chances of something happening. That's if wrecks do happen in other tracks, well, they just don't have the same media attention that they do in Calgary. So the Calgary, the Stampede's has been very cognizant of that, and they've taken steps to try and mitigate it and keep it happening. So I think it's hopefully based on what's happened here in the last few weeks, even that the future may continue on.
Excellent. So as we wind down here, Glenn, tell us what's next for this book. You got it printed yet? Do you have a hard copy?
I have not seen a hard copy of it, so I'm not sure when this is going to be aired to the global masses and just gobbled up with such...
Buckle up when it does get aired.
The hungry ears of the planet, desperate to hear this tale. The plan. Here's the plan. The plan was to have it for the tarp auction, but that did not happen. So there was issues. Anyways, that did not happen. So, but we need to have it. If it's coming out, it's got to be in somebody's hand who can sell it at the Grand Prairie Stampede at the end of May.
End of May, okay.
End of May, right? So that's Kelly's hometown. There's the Stampede. There's all kinds of opportunities to share the book and talk about the book. And so that's kind of the deadline, and that's the start of the World Professional Chuckwagon Association season. So then there's opportunities to talk about it throughout the summer. So that's the driving date, honestly, I think. They've got to have it, hopefully, I was told it should be here in the next week or two, but I haven't heard that it's not going to be, so that is the goal, to have it ready for the Stampede.
Have the Sutherland seen a final draft of the book yet?
Oh, bless his heart. So Kelly was very good. I sent him a copy, like a rough draft, last March. So he had a chance to review it then and give me his feedback. And he was terrific about that. And then he had the final edited draft. And he said that they read it about 6 times. So he's gone through it, gave us feedback. And so what you two saw would be the copy that has been reviewed and perused.
Excellent.
Oh yeah, because for this type of book, as I mentioned, it's critical to have Kelly's endorsement of it, because if he does not think it's a good reflection of what he's done, then it's going to sit in a bunch of boxes and collect a bunch of dust, and no one's going to care about it. So he needs to be a champion for it, and thankfully he's been just tremendous to work with. So just very, very appreciative for all the time that he's put into it.
Well, it's a great story, great Western Canadian story. You did a great job.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
It'll go well for sure.
Yeah, agreed. If you had to look at some other books that have been written either in this genre or any others for that matter, we're going to close up by asking you a couple of author-reader questions. So what would you say are your top 3 all-time books?
Top 3, Glenn.
Have you read Ron Burgundy's biography?
I'm not.
Well, I highly encourage you to pick up the biography of Ron Burgundy.
Okay. All right. I love it.
I don't know of a book that makes me laugh as much as that one.
Okay.
It's a must-read.
Okay.
Awesome. All right.
What else? See, you need to give. I don't. You got to give me some time to prep on these type of tough questions.
Yeah, we should have told you before about this.
Yeah.
And so, Glenn, importantly, if people are many listeners want to follow you, where are they going to do that?
Well, I have a high traffic Instagram page that my daughters just relish in my posts. They go, yeah. Anyway, I won't spoil the surprise for people that want to sign up. But if they want to look at Never Holler Whoa, that's my tagline.
Okay.
Well, I'll let Ross close out, but I wanted to thank you for the book. And thank you for the time. It was a terrific adventure for me to read because he's a face that you see in all those photos. He's got the same expression when he's on the track and he's focused and racing. And yeah, that's iconic. And I loved reliving some of that in your book. So thanks.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.
You've been listening to Literally Drinking with Paul Boucher and Ross Mikkelsen. In this episode, it was all about author Glen Mikkelsen's book, Kelly Sutherland, King of the Chucks. The book is available on Amazon for pre-order as of this episode. The link is on your screen. Please leave us a sugary, near embarrassing 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening.